Get started. I think I know everybody around the room, so you know who I am as well. We'll do this in an informal fashion. And I have a bio for Tonie Jáquez. I think I'm going to put it aside because I'll get caught up in the details, and I want to rather convey my enthusiasm for her visit here. We've talked about it a long time. We had the pleasure. I've had the pleasure to know Tonie for some 15 years or so, and we see each other regularly at NPT meetings, be it in Geneva, Vienna, in New York, and then also, of course, the summer school, which she was instrumental in arranging. That we hold every year, next city in July, and we are approaching the 10th anniversary of that activity. Tonie's formal title, according to the CV that I have here, is a coordinator for disarmament and non-proliferation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. But the titles really are misleading. We have the opportunity frequently to organize diplomatic workshops, both online and in person, that bring together heads of international organizations, the most senior ambassadors from key players. But when we are talking about disarmament and non-proliferation, without regard to titles, and it comes to the question of inviting someone to speak on a panel, we always turn to Tonie as really the embodiment of expertise and institutional memory in the Mexican Foreign Ministry on disarmament and non-proliferation affairs. And it's no secret that she is the person to go to. And what's so surprising to me is that this is the first time that she's visited. It's hard for me to believe. I think simply because I see her so frequently at different places, most recently in Geneva, before that earlier this summer, in Vienna. But finally, I get to introduce her in person in Monterey, California. So Tonie, it's a great pleasure to have you here. We look forward to whatever you have to say. I know technically, I think you're going to be talking about the TPNW and nuclear weapons free zones approach for the disarmament and non-proliferation. But whatever you have to say, I'm sure will be profound. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Bill, and you're making me cry. I am very, very humbled by your words. It's a privilege to be here in Monterey. I hope to be like in Casablanca. No, this is the beginning of a wonderful friendship. But we have been friends for a long time, but it is also a very great honor because this is a prestigious education and institution, an academic venue for new ideas and for reflection on this issue. So I am very, very honored to be here. And I hope that we can have an interesting discussion afterwards. That can be of use also for your papers, for your own reflection on these issues. Well, I will start speaking a little bit about these two issues, the nuclear weapon free zones and the TPNW. But I know that you already have had some lessons about this, and you have had some background materials. So I'm not going to focus on the history or the details, but I just want to offer a few reflections and points of framing this issue from the point of view of a country like Mexico. I cannot dare to portray my position as a position of not even of Mexico, but of the whole Latin American and the Caribbean states. But I can assure you that many of the Caribbean states, Latin American states, share this view in one way or the other. So, of course, we have nuances and we can talk about them later, but this is not in a way a portrayal of an official position of any government, but just a reflection of the significance of these contributions that my region, my country have made to the peace and security of our region, but also of the world, and to the disarmament and non-proliferation regime. So the first thing I want to talk about is something that sometimes is very manipulated in the diplomatic discourse, which is the concept of political will. And I'm going to tell you why I want to start talking about this, because everybody says that there is no political will nowadays to continue working towards negotiations or to get outcomes out of negotiations. So I wanted to, for instance, because political will is something that is a little bit elusive, and I have just said that it's manipulated a lot. For example, President Obama wanted to ratify the CTBT. He had a political will. So why can't the United States ratify the CTBT? So political will is not anymore a decision of Lord, as if we were in medieval times, that can say, I want to do this, and then all the political actors and all the political sectors and all the decision-making parties obey and do whatever somebody wants, okay? And political will is a concept that has been managed as if it was like that, like the decision of one person or one group of persons or a government or, okay, but it is not that. It is a conjunction of actors, especially nowadays that we have seen that the security is multi-sectorial. And, as Antonio Guterres said in his speech to the General Assembly 2 or 3 years ago, we have been humbled and put in our knees by something that we cannot see as a virus. So we cannot deny that the security concerns of states have to do with a lot of sectors and with a lot of issues, and not only with military issues. So why am I saying that, and why this is important to say? Because I think that this is one of the most important things to consider when we're talking about current multilateralism, because if we want to have outcomes or new trends or new issues to work on in multilateralism, we also need to understand the multisectoriality. But in the 1960s, during the Cold War, this was, at least in the political discourse, this was not the case. Everything had to do with the security of the state and with the security, military security of states and borders and territorial concerns, at least in the political discourse. And the nuclear weapon-free zones have often been characterized as a political destiny and not a sovereign decision. A sovereign decision of political will. That's why I wanted to mention this, because they are often portrayed as, well, the only thing that was to be done by this group of countries. Some have even mocked the countries as that have gone for nuclear weapon zones as a group of monks prohibiting chastity. Somebody said, making a treaty about chastity. But it is not a destiny. It is not like a political destiny. It is a sovereign decision that involves not a narrative, but the way the countries have conceptualized themselves for a long time. So just think about Mexico. The only developing country, that still shares 3,000 kilometers of border with the only country that has used a nuclear weapon in a warlike scenario. So the easiest or cheapest way to go after the war, and with all the narratives that were floating around at the time and the realities that were at the time, the cheapest or the easiest thing would have been to maybe apply for an umbrella agreement. That would have been easy, very easy, because it was logical, it was justified, it was Mexico was part of the allied group that won the war. It was not an original idea. Canada had already done it, so it was something that would have been easy. Why did Mexico and the Latin American states didn't go for that? There are a lot of reasons, and this is not the subject of this chat. But one of the things that we need to consider and to remember is that the relationship of Mexico and Latin American states, as well as other regions of the world, have a very heavy link and influence of the colonial times and of the way that our countries and our governments have been tied with colonial powers, and the way that we relate to those powers of the time of each century. Pick the century you want, we can analyze year by year that century, and that is what shapes the psyche of a nation. So even if the governments of Latin America and the Caribbean were part of the Allied bloc, they had a very subtle, sometimes evident, sometimes a relationship with the powers at the time that impeded to consider looking at war and looking at the gains of war in the same way that Mexico or the Latin American states had looked at that vis-a-vis the United States and the allied powers. So that is the reason why, you know, there are not a lot of similar nuclear or not nuclear military alliances all over the world. Some are more similar than others, but certainly not between Mexico and the United States. But the moment that the nuclear weapons appeared in the political sphere, Mexico and other countries decided to reject them, even though there was no UN, and the countries from the global, what we call now the global south, could not speak at the UN for many years. You can see that the debates were focused only on the possessors of nuclear weapons. And if you look, I recommend that you have a look at the resolutions of the 50s and of the 60s and the acts to see the tone of the discussion and the debate, because the resolutions looked a little bit like that, like this, no, that I'm going to make a cartoon of, no? They say like, please, 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 oh, you powerful countries, please inform us what you have been talking about. Thank you so much, because you have been so generous in explaining to us what you have been talking about, no? So all the resolutions are more or less like that. There is not a lot of involvement of other countries in giving an opinion or talking about this, but there was a rejection of the way the war had, you know, determined a little bit of the characteristics of the world. And you can see that in the debates of the San Francisco conference, the battle for shaping a United Nations that was more equal and democratic and participative for countries that were not the main involved in the war. And all of this has to do with the rejection of nuclear weapons in the Latin American context. But when the 18 Nations Committee in 1962 started working on some of the Latin American countries, governments were participating there. This is the grandfather of the current conference on disarmament. You could see the Latin American governments rejecting nuclear weapons from the beginning. And this was a sovereign decision. By the same token, some other countries, regardless of the level of development, decided not to go this way. Decided to go to the umbrella agreements, or decided to develop nuclear weapons themselves. And this is a sovereign decision. So I wanted to emphasize this fact, because sometimes it feels as if there was nothing left to do for some regions of the world, but declare themselves nuclear weapon free. And this is not the case. So if this is a sovereign decision, and if this is a thing that became a more political will than other decisions, then the means to ensure the status have some different value. So the decision of the governments of Latin America and the Caribbean after the missile crisis in 1962 to start negotiating a legally binding agreement to ensure the nuclear weapon-free zone, or to declare or to establish the first nuclear weapon-free zone in a densely populated area, because, as you know, there were already treaties in other areas that were not densely populated, as the outer space, the seabed, Antarctica. But the densely populated areas establishment as nuclear weapon-free zones, the first in Latin America and the Caribbean, then the other ones. That was it is a big a statement of not only political nature but also legal nature, and because it's a legal agreement, it had to involve the congresses or the legislative power of each of the countries. It was not easy. This is another misconception that thinks or portrays, all the countries in Latin America declaring to be nuclear weapon free, and then everybody automatically passing these treaties through their congresses. And it was not like that. It took the Latin American and the Caribbean region 40 years, more or less, to consolidate the status. All the parliaments had to ratify. Fortunately, one of the articles in the Tlatelolco Treaty, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, that's the proper name. There is an article about the provisional implementation of the treaty, while all the countries in the region participate in the treaty or adhere to the treaty, and the zone could be established with a focal point in an organization in Mexico City, which is OPANAL, and that could get going, but with a lot of reticence from a lot of countries in the region that didn't want to bind themselves or to find themselves in a position of having more obligations. And still, after 20 years of having the last country join, which was Cuba, we still have a lot of challenges. We have some logistical challenges. I can share with you some of them. For example, there was an amendment to the treaty in the 90s, because originally it was the Treaty for the Prohibition of Weapons in Latin America. Then we had to amend it to include the Caribbean. so that there is a marked difference between the Caribbean and Latin America, and some countries in the region have not ratified the amendment yet. They have not realized that they have to do that. So parties in the region, I'm not going to mention which ones, have not paid their duties for a long time to the treaty. So we're still struggling with that issue. The other issue is that some of them have never wanted to participate in the government organs, and that is a distortion, because we want to have ownership in all the decision-making processes inside the organization, OPANAL. This is a question that I get a lot, so I address it also as a challenge, because they ask us, why aren't there any Mexican Secretary Generals of OPANAL? Well, the treaty says that Mexicans cannot be Secretary Generals of OPANAL, no? So this was a very avant-garde decision in 1960, in the decision-making process of 1963 to 1967, that Mexico decided not to claim this posting for a Mexican, because the treaty was going to have its headquarters, Mexico was going to be the depository state, and also OPANAL was going to have headquarters in Mexico. So another national of another government would have to lead the OPANAL, so that there would be some ownership and equal opportunity. But this becomes a challenge, because not all the parties have candidates or struggle with nominations of people suitable for the job. And all of these issues demonstrate that this is an organization that is working under the pressure of the governments that have created, and that we need to struggle and work with the efficiency of any multilateral international organization. So it's not easy. And this can be influenced by the issues in the region and in the world, of course. And so this is another need. This is not an easy thing. But then the last thing that I wanted to tell you about is that this is just a regional oriented organization, and that goes for all the other nuclear weapon-free zones. That the impact of the Bangkok Treaty is only in Southeast Asia, or the Rarotonga Treaty only in the Pacific, etc. And one of the biggest misconceptions about the nuclear weapon-free zones is that the regional impact pertains only to the parties to these treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones. And I sustain, and this is part of the discussion that we want to have, is that the nuclear weapon-free zones are one of the main contributions to the nuclear non-proliferation disarmament regime, but also to nuclear risk reduction. It's a tool of nuclear risk reduction, and they are never portrayed like that. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more. Nuclear weapon-free zones are a contribution to the regime because, well, for starters, before the Tlatelolco Treaty, there was no treaty at all, multilateral on nuclear weapons at all. It was the multilateral treaties that we conceive now didn't exist yet. There were some regional arrangements, the ones on the ones of the nuclearization of certain areas were, the pioneer, but not the ones that involved some states. And when the Tlatelolco Treaty negotiations started, it was the first time for the governments to get involved in this type of negotiations, because, as I said before, at the UN, they were not parties of the body that were negotiating treaties. And that is why it was a first. But the contribution goes beyond that, beyond the establishment. Frequently here at the CNS and all the materials that the fellowship and the courses here portray the NPT as a success for non-proliferation, and I am always struck by all these assertions that more than 40 countries or 50 countries would be nuclear weapon states have the NPT not exist, or the existed, or if we didn't have this type of controls in place. No, this is something that we often discuss. And in this consideration, we never take into account the value or the role that nuclear weapon-free zones played in this contention of proliferation. So imagine what the world would be without the 5 nuclear weapon-free zones and Mongolia. We would have nuclear weapons, even with the NPT, it would have been a little bit more difficult to enforce the non-proliferation aspect, because the NPT, I'm sorry, doesn't have a clear rejection or a prohibition, explicit prohibition of the weapon, which exists in the nuclear weapon-free zone treaties, or the treaties establishing these zones. So that it changed completely the way the legislation, the national legislation, looks at the weapons and the provisions of non-proliferation and also even peaceful uses. I'm going to give you an example. In the Mexican law, why do we need to fulfill our safeguards agreement, or even adhere to an additional protocol, which is a voluntary measure that Mexico adhered to, and in the rationale to present that treaty to the Senate, the comprehensive safeguards agreement and the additional protocol, the rationale was, well, because in our law, we have already prohibited nuclear weapons as a means of war. So in order to ensure that we don't acquire or develop a nuclear weapon, we need to fulfill the comprehensive safeguards agreement. That was the rationale for the legislators to look at this agreement. And so the prohibition of nuclear weapons becomes the reason why, not another thing to do, but the reason why everything else has to work or fall into place. It's not a what, it's a why. And that permeated the legislative debate and also the political debate. It has also demonstrated the value of these zones as a nuclear risk reduction measure, because we often think of nuclear risk reduction now that it is a little bit more in fashion to talk about those issues as part of the non-proliferation regime measures, although it has been there forever. But nuclear risk reduction measures are often considered to be part of the obligations of what nuclear weapon states or countries with nuclear weapons or military powers need to do in order to avoid escalation or to avoid the development of mistrust, and they are often paired to confidence building measures. But from the point of view of non-nuclear weapon states, it is sometimes forgotten that nuclear weapon free zones are the confidence building measure by essence, and that declaring in our own system that we have rejected the nuclear option, that there is a prohibition of nuclear weapons of possession, acquisition, development, testing, use, etc. It is already the basis of all our legislation. It's a confidence building measure, but it is also a risk reduction measure, because it has given a political signal to the nuclear weapon states that nuclear weapon free zones parties do not pose any risk for the security of nuclear weapon states. So this would have to take into account into the relationships bilateral and multilateral and regional with these states. The best way to exemplify this notion is that the nuclear weapon free zone in Latin America and the Caribbean, with not easily, but with a lot of effort, is the only one that has all the ratifications of the nuclear weapon states in the NPT, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, of the protocols to the zone that grant some negative security assurances, and also that recognize the nuclearist status of the zone. And so this has some intrinsic recognition that this zone has been contribution, or a positive contribution to peace and security. Otherwise, these countries, the nuclear weapon states, would not be comfortable enough to ratify yet. And that is the argument that unfortunately they have been posing, not to conclude the ratification of all the other treaties, because they have doubts about some of the provisions in the treaty regarding to transportation to the geographical zone that one of the nuclear weapon free zones comprehends, and some other excuses not to conclude this ratification process. But in a way, the attitude of the nuclear weapon states has been to continue supporting nuclear weapon free zones establishment, because they contribute to peace and security and stability, and because they immediately reduce the tensions and reduce the plausible escalation. It's not a guarantee. The only guarantee not to use nuclear weapons is the elimination of nuclear weapons. What doesn't exist cannot harm, cannot proliferate. But the fact that we have groups of countries to establish this as a political not only slogan, but basis for actions, it was very, very valuable, and has already been very valuable. Of course, we need to have more nuclear weapon free zones wherever they can be established. The Middle East nuclear weapon free zone has been a challenge for several reasons. I am not going to criticize the basis for the establishment of this zone, but one of the main claims, or the main conditions to have all the countries of the zone participating from the beginning, it's not, I mean, it is of course an ideal, it is desirable, but this has not happened with the other nuclear weapon free zones. If we had waited for all the countries in Latin America to participate in the zone, we would not have the OPANAL established in a region, or that would go for Pelindab and for Rarotonga and for all the other zones. I'm not saying that this is a mistake, but I understand what that claim, or what that requisite comes from, but that's not the historical development of that zone. Other zones have attempted to exist. It is not going to be possible, but for example, the original Rapasti plan for it was the origin of the nuclear weapons came from Poland, from a Polish ambassador to the grandfather of the CD, and to propose that some countries declare themselves nuclear weapon free in the 60s was a huge deal. But because of the geopolitical influence of the military alliances, I don't think that happened in the 60s, and those conditions will prevail for now. But I come from a generation, like I was talking to Bill the other day. When I was growing up, I was studying in the university, and I had some classes with some Brazilian diplomats that said we will never join the NPT. No, or I also was taught that well, the USSR was never going to cease to be. So the word never in international relations is very, very relative to me because of what has happened during my lifetime as an international relations student and a diplomat. But so let's not say this will never happen, but because I don't know, maybe it will happen. But so far, the Southern Hemisphere and Central Asia is already a nuclear weapon-free zone. All the treaties in this cover the Southern Hemisphere. There is even a resolution of the General Assembly presented by Brazil that recognizes this. And Central Asia is a nuclear weapon-free zone, and Mongolia now is a nuclear weapon-free zone, plus the non-populated areas. So we can continue working towards making the world a nuclear weapon-free world as it was before 1940, not before 1945. So that is for the nuclear weapon-free zones. I am going to end my commentary saying, what does this have to do with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons? So the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is one of the most important developments in the multilateral work that we have done in the United Nations regarding these issues. For several reasons. First, because it changed the dynamics of the conversation and the topics that we talk about. Before in 2017, this is something that has been said a lot, but I need to say, before 2017, nuclear weapons were the only category of weapons of mass destruction that were not subject of an explicit prohibition of, possession, acquisition, development, transfer, placement, etc., in any treaty. Everybody can have their opinion about the treaties and the validity of the treaty, but the truth is that there is no obstacle, or there is no condition under international law that impedes a group of states to gather together and legislate on whatever they think is good for them. So there is no impossibility to do this. Okay, so the group of countries that agreed to the negotiation of the TPNW, the Prohibition, the Nuclear Ban Treaty at the UN, decided that was the way to go. And we didn't have that prohibition explicitly stated in any treaty before, and this is one of the values, the historical values of the treaty. But the other thing that really changed after the TPNW, and this is what I wanted to focus about, is the narrative and the way we talk about nuclear weapons, because before the TPNW, not only did we not have the prohibition, but we also didn't talk about what weapons do, what these weapons do. We talked about who had the weapons, who couldn't have the weapons, who said that they deserved the weapons, and who said that were the original possessors of nuclear weapons, nobody else could have. We talked about those things a lot. We didn't talk about what weapons do, what these weapons do, and why they became so powerful and became part of this narrative of the Cold War and underpinned the international discourse about security, and why they have become so important that they are considered the basis of the foundation for strategic stability. We didn't talk about that. Those were the talks of the side events of the UN, no? The academic institutions talking to the NGOs, the survivors of nuclear weapons and testing were there, but only in the side events, and that is a disgrace. I'm not saying the side events by themselves, but the issue that we didn't talk about that in the room. We don't talk about that a lot yet, if I am very, very honest, but little by little, they talk about the concern about prevention of these, of what weapons do, has become the mainstreaming threat for joining the two sides of the room. The countries without nuclear weapons have become not the have-nots, because usually in the NPT context or in the UN context, there was this looming division of the haves and the have-nots. Now the have-nots have become the ones that are talking about what weapons do and need to be heard, because we are concerned about this possibility, and also the ones with weapons have had to challenge that notion, and then they have to little by little accept that if there was a nuclear detonation by intentional or accidental or in any scenario, there would be consequences for the whole world. And they would not be able to protect even their own populations, which is the basis of their own security doctrines. And that assertion, they have not been able to do that openly, but little by little, they will have to join that conversation. And that has eliminated a little bit of the divide. Some say that they have polarized, that these notions have polarized the room more, but I always say, no, yeah, of course, it looks like that, but in the end, it's like the emperor's new clothes tale. Okay, so the ones that are feeling naked are the ones that have said for decades that nuclear weapons are very good for security and they protect the security and that this is the value of nuclear weapons. Now they have to justify that assertion vis-a-vis the other ones that are talking about what weapons do and that are bringing the so-called humanitarian discourse to the room. And this is an effect of the talk about the need to prohibit nuclear weapons, and that was materialized in the TPNW treaty. So just a quick note on the TPNW vis-a-vis the nuclear weapon-free zones. From the point of view of my country, at least, the TPNW is a Tlatelolco global treaty, and because if you see the prohibition of nuclear weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean has the same provisions of the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. In our view, this can be used as an outlet for some of the governments in regions that cannot join nuclear weapon-free zones for some geopolitical impediment or concerns. And this demonstrates again what I said in the beginning, that this is an expression of sovereign decision. So maybe some countries like Austria or Ireland cannot make their own nuclear weapon-free zone, but it is their sovereign decision to join a treaty like the TPNW and prohibit nuclear weapons on their own. And this is again an expression of what you can do if you want to have that assertion in your political discourse and in your legislative processes. The treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons still has a lot of challenges. We have 69 parties. We had 2 more signatures recently. This is a good pace of ratification, even though it looks low. It has been more or less the same rate of ratifications for other treaties, even a little bit quicker. It entered into force rather quickly. We celebrated, and we were very glad to have the first meeting of 6 parties last year. The second meeting of 6 parties this year is going to be chaired by a Mexican ambassador, Ambassador de la Fuente, in November 2027 to December 1st, 2023. We hope that we can continue working with the states parties on the implementation of what was agreed in Vienna last year, mainly universalization and some attention to what to do with the reparation of damage to victims of testing and nuclear weapons, and also some discussion about the possible establishment of a secretariat or an organization to verify the treaty when we have nuclear weapon states joining the treaty. But this is not the most urgent talk. There is a lot of pressure on the nuclear weapons from the nuclear weapon states and also their allies to demonstrate that the TPNW doesn't have any effect in legal terms or in reality. People often ask me how many nuclear weapons are going to disappear because of the TPNW. So I always say none. Of course, that any treaty would have that effect. And there is no treaty that would automatically disappear nuclear weapons. But international law doesn't work that way. International law sets high standards to set a horizon or a fine line of division between civilization and the law of the jungle. I always say, yeah, of course, we have to recognize that there is a law in the jungle, but we also have to remember that there is law in the jungle. And if we have that horizon, then we elevate the political cost of everything that is wrong in the world. In the news today or yesterday, you have been hearing a lot of actors call for implementation of international humanitarian law because of what's happening in the Middle East, unfortunately. And there is no discussion about who's party of these treaties, if these treaties apply or not. There is also the call for implementation of these high standards. And having these high standards is what has separated us from the law of the jungle for many, many years. When I started my diplomatic career, chemical weapons were still legal. The tests of nuclear weapons were still legal. The cluster munitions were still legal. The landmines were still legal. And nuclear weapons were still legal because there were no treaties establishing a prohibition of nuclear weapons. So I don't know about you, but I prefer to live in the world today when all these treaties exist. And I know that all these weapons of indiscriminate nature that only affect civilians mainly are prohibited by law and not legal for everyone. Okay, and that doesn't mean that some are never going to join the treaties. These treaties, they say, because I always remind myself that never is a very relative word in international relations. So I will finish my talk with this reflection, but I am very open to questions and commentaries, and also to hear your views about what I said, or if I can solve some doubt or question that you would have about everything else. I am here to listen and also to learn from you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.